Kevin Harvick was handed the most famous seat in NASCAR 3 weeks after its greatest driver died in it. He was 25 years old, had never started a Cup race from the front, and the entire sport was watching him with doubt in their eyes. What he did next is the reason he just received 46 out of 50 Hall of Fame votes on the very first ballot they ever put his name on. That is where this Hall of Fame story begins, and if you think you already know it, stick around, because the numbers behind what Harvick actually built across 23 seasons in the NASCAR Cup Series are genuinely staggering in a way the highlight reels do not fully capture. On May 19, 2026, at the NASCAR Hall of Fame building in Charlotte, North Carolina, Kevin Harvick officially received his selection to the class of 2027, earning 46 of the 50 votes cast by the full selection panel. First ballot, 92% of the vote. The induction ceremony at the Charlotte Hall of Fame is set for January 22, 2027, and Harvick will walk across that stage alongside former Richard Childress racing teammate Jeff Burton and short track legend Larry Phillips. But today, this story is about Harvick because no career in the modern era of this sport carries more emotional and historical weight from its very first week on the job. Let's go back to Atlanta Motor Speedway in March of 2001, just 3 weeks after Daytona. Kevin Harvick, driving the renumbered number 29 GM Goodwrench Service Plus Chevrolet, the same car Dale Earnhardt made famous, stepped onto that 1.5-mile oval carrying a weight that no young driver should have to carry. The crowd at Atlanta International Raceway was enormous, emotional, and deeply uncertain about this kid who had been handed an impossible assignment. Harvick did not ease anyone's nerves. He raced like he had been there for a decade, and at the end of that afternoon, he crossed the finish line in first place. Third career Cup Series start. Victory lane in a car still painted in Earnhardt's colors. The entire Richard Childress racing team broke down in tears. It remains one of the most emotionally overwhelming moments in NASCAR history, and Kevin Harvick delivered it at the exact moment the sport needed it most. From that afternoon at Atlanta, Harvick built a career that almost defies simple categorization. He won NASCAR Rookie of the Year in 2001 while simultaneously running Xfinity Series races for RCR, won the Xfinity Championship that same year, and by the time he had settled into the number 29 full-time, he was already one of the most aggressive, unpredictable, and fearless drivers in any garage. He earned the nickname The Closer for a reason that anyone who watched him race in the 2010s understands completely. Harvick was never more dangerous than in the final 20 laps of any race. When the pressure was at its absolute maximum, when the cars were tightest together and every inch of the racing surface mattered, Kevin Harvick found another gear that most drivers never even knew existed. His win total across the Cup Series reached 60 victories over 826 starts, placing him 11th on the all-time list in NASCAR history. But that raw number does not do justice to where he won or how he won. 9 wins at Phoenix Raceway alone, the all-time record at that 1-mile desert oval. Phoenix was his personal property for a decade, and calling him the king of the desert there is not hyperbole, it is accounting. He also stands in one of the rarest categories in NASCAR, one of just 4 drivers in the entire history of the sport to win all 4 crown jewel events. The Daytona 500 in 2007, the Coca-Cola 600 at Charlotte Motor Speedway, the Brickyard 400 at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and the Southern 500 at Darlington Raceway. 4 events, 4 wins. A club with exactly 4 members in it, and Harvick holds a seat at that table. The championship came in 2014, and it came in the most dominant first season imaginable. Harvick left Richard Childress Racing after 13 years and joined Stewart-Haas Racing, pairing with crew chief Rodney Childers, and those two together immediately produced something extraordinary. 5 wins, 8 poles, a career-high 2,137 laps led, and a championship clinched at Homestead Miami Speedway with a late 4-tire pit call that put him out front with 8 laps to go. Kevin Harvick, who had carried the sport on his back in the worst moment of its modern history, held a NASCAR Cup Series championship trophy 13 years later. That does not happen by accident. That happens because the foundation built in Bakersfield on go-karts, and in the Richard Childress Racing Garage in the grief of 2001, was genuinely unbreakable. What people sometimes forget, and what the Hall of Fame voters clearly did not, was that 2020 proved Harvick was not just a product of his team or his moment. At 44 years old, an age by which most elite NASCAR drivers have either retired or significantly declined, Harvick won 9 races in the 2020 season. 9 wins in a single year. That is not a veteran hanging on. That is a driver operating at the absolute peak of his craft, putting up numbers that young contenders half his age could not match. The 2020 regular season championship was his alone, and even though the playoff format eliminated him before the finale, what he produced that summer and fall was one of the finest stretches of racing in the last decade of the sport. He also won 47 races in the Xfinity Series across his career and added 14 victories in the Truck Series, bringing his combined National Series win total to 121, which ranks him 3rd all-time in NASCAR history behind only Richard Petty and Kyle Busch. Read that list again: Richard Petty, Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick. That is the tier this man belongs to. And now Kevin Harvick, who retired after the 2023 season and moved into the Fox Sports broadcast booth where he currently calls Cup Series races alongside Mike Joy and Clint Bowyer, will officially be immortalized inside the NASCAR Hall of Fame building in Charlotte on January 22, 2027. He joins 70 other inductees who have already walked through those doors since the hall opened in 2010. The total number of enshrined members climbs to 73 with this class. Jeff Burton, who was Harvick's teammate at Richard Childress Racing for years, gets in alongside him a 21-win Cup career over 695 starts that included a pair of Coca-Cola 600 victories and a Southern 500. And Larry Phillips, a short-track legend who died in 2004 with an estimated win total somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 races across dirt and asphalt tracks, where nobody was always keeping exact count, gets his recognition on the Pioneer ballot where he absolutely belongs. Kevin Harvick walked into the most devastating moment in NASCAR history as a 25-year-old kid from Bakersfield with no Cup experience, and he walked out of the sport 23 years later as a 60-win champion with a Daytona 500, a national title, and a phone call that just told him he is going into the Hall of Fame. First ballot, 92% of the vote, fully and completely earned. What makes this Hall of Fame selection feel different from most is the timing. Harvick retired after the 2023 season, stepped into the Fox broadcast booth immediately, and then watched his name go on a ballot the very next cycle it was eligible. That is not a courtesy vote. That is a panel of 50 people looking at a resume and running out of reasons to wait. The broadcast transition also matters here because it tells you something real about who Kevin Harvick is away from the wheel. He did not disappear. He did not move to a ranch somewhere and check out of the sport the way some drivers do the moment the helmet comes off. He sat down in front of a microphone next to Mike Joy and Clint Bowyer and started doing the work of explaining racing to people who love it. That is a man who genuinely respects the sport that built him. You do not have to fake that kind of investment at 48 years old. And the legacy he leaves behind for the next generation of drivers is not just the win totals or the championship or the crown jewels. It is the 2001 story. Because every young driver who comes into this sport and faces an impossible situation, whether it is pressure from a sponsor, a team in crisis, or a moment too big for their resume, they can go look at what a 25-year-old from Bakersfield did at Atlanta Motor Speedway in March of 2001, with the whole sport watching and expecting him to fail. He did not fail. He won. That story is now permanently inside the NASCAR Hall of Fame building in Charlotte, North Carolina, where it will sit for as long as anyone cares about this sport. And if you have watched even 10 races of NASCAR Cup Series racing in the last 20 years, you already know exactly why it belongs there. Kevin Harvick, first ballot, done.